Today, I think this topic is one of the most concerned topics, not just in New Zealand, but in the whole world, because it is so interesting that even though we are facing one of the most serious recessions, but housing prices in many countries rebound almost at the same time. So this kind of counterintuitive phenomenon is hard to explain, and different people provide different suggestions. So today I'm trying to provide some casual observation first, and then a more panel data econometric analysis, which tried to suggest which hypothesis would be more tenable. So I'm Rebou Yu, Associate Professor of the Department of Property, University of Auckland Business School. And if you would like to have some written notes here, you can find the full article and also another PowerPoint available in our website. Yeah. So first of all, here the chart shows you that in 2020 Q2, New Zealand encountered the deepest recession since the 1990s. To negative 11.4% year-on-year change in GDP. Well, at the same time, here shows you the house price index and the house price change year-on-year growth rate. The orange line is the house price index, and the blue shade are the year-on-year growth rate. And you will find that after the outbreak of COVID, then it rebounds substantially, right, before 2020 in the negative zone. But after 2020, it rebounded and grew to almost 20% per annum. So it's totally, right, unimaginable. How come when the economy was so bad that then the house price can rebound to such an extent? Well, of course, we understand that New Zealand has been the second most unaffordable housing market in the world, even in 2020. It has been well known or notorious to be very unaffordable. But interestingly, after the outbreak of the COVID, then we find something very difficult to explain by traditional hypothesis. Here, I tried to collect some commentators, analysts, or newspapers, clippings. They have the following 5 common hypotheses that I'm going to go through one by one. The first one is about economic growth. The second one, someone would say, oh, there's no capital gain tax. So they ask the government to impose the capital gain tax. And the third one must be the most common explanation, that there's a lack of housing supply, insufficient housing supply, so house price unaffordable. And then, right, some people would say, oh, migrants is one of the major reasons. And the last one is about monetary policy, interest rate cut, and mortgage restriction relaxation. So let's go through one by one. Economic growth. So in the past, this seems to be very reasonable, but this time I chose 6 economies: Australia, Canada, Hong Kong, New Zealand, the UK, the US. And you'll find that all of them have undergone a very serious global recession, right? Canada, New Zealand, and UK even got a double-digit negative GDP growth rate. It's totally unreasonable to say it's because of economic growth that house price increased, right? Here shows you all these 6 economies got a very positive increase in house price at the same time when their GDP went down substantially. Especially in New Zealand, right? It went up to double-digit increase. And this scatter plot really tells us that this time economic growth is an outlier. Right? In the past, you will find a very clear and positive correlation between the GDP growth rate and the house price growth rate. But this time, when the GDP growth rate was negative 11.4%, but still it got a positive. So people would say, oh, this time may not be due to economic growth. Then how about, would it be because of the tax system? I would say, theoretically, New Zealand has a capital gain tax, but it is subject to a bright line rule. Well, that's the reason why we have to carry out this cross-economies, right, cross-countries examination, because only then we realize that Hong Kong, say, for example, is a truly no capital gain tax economy, but still they got housing price rebound. Well, in the UK, say, for example, it had a 20% capital gain tax. It also get the same rebound. So by means of this kind of cross-economies analysis, then we can understand that these may not be likely to be the reason for the house price rebound in this post-COVID period. And here shows you the change of the bright line property rules. Since 2015, then, right, the government imposed the income tax whenever residential property was resold within 2 years' time, and then it has been changed to 5 years, and more recently extended to 10 years' time. And here shows you that the rebound of the house price across these 6 economies are more or less synchronized, almost at the same time, right? You will probably agree that before 2019, most of the house price went down. And then between 2019 and 2020, right, many of them turned to the upward direction. And some of them got capital gain tax, some of them did not. And there's no change in capital gain tax rule in that period. So it's not reasonable to argue that it's due to the capital gain tax. Okay, then the third hypothesis is the most common excuse for house price change, insufficient house supply. But take a look about the government report that indeed in the past few years, every year we got positive surplus. The increase in houses or housing units exceeds the increase in new households. So here shows you the recent 2 years data, and then it shows you, right, a longer time series. Since 2006, new private dwellings number has been more than the number of new households. Bearing in mind that we have not included public dwellings, social houses, state houses, but still we got positive surpluses, and the surplus have been larger and larger, right? So unless the argument is people or household have to own more than one houses, otherwise it does not make sense to say, right, it's because of insufficient housing supply that we get housing rebound. And bearing in mind that it is totally unimaginable if you say just before the COVID, then suddenly the 6th economy got an insufficient housing supply. Right? So then how about migrant? I would say New Zealand provides one of the best experiments to test this hypothesis. Because since October 2018, then the government enacted a new law, Overseas Investment Amendment Act, that banned all non-residents or non-citizens from buying houses. So it becomes a natural experiment to examine whether migrant is the reason for. And the chart shows you that since the enactment of the new law, then the buyers of NCNR, non-citizen, non-residence buyers, dropped substantially, right, to less than 200, but the NCNR sellers is more or less the same. So since 2019 Q1, NCNR seller has been more than NCNR buyers, right? So it's not the migrants' demand, it's the migrant supply that is affecting the market. The final hypothesis is about the mortgage policy. Then here shows you the Reserve Bank of New Zealand's actions in March and May. First of all, in March 2020, the Reserve Bank cut the OCR by 75 BPS, and the 1-year mortgage rate and the 2-year mortgage rate follows the trend and reduced by more than 1%. And almost at the same time, right, maybe just 1 month later, then the Reserve Bank make another decisions to remove the loan-to-value ratio restriction for 12 months. That means people can borrow more, pay less down payment. But these two removal of restrictions have been reinstated in March and May this year, right? So probably it indicated that even the Reserve Bank agreed that this relaxation of the mortgage loan restrictions is one of the major reasons for the house price rebound. So let's go into more details about the cross-economies examination about the interest rate cut. And here shows the 6 economies before and after the outbreak of the COVID. And you will find a consistent downward cut in interest rate. And the most substantial cut, I think, will be the Canada from 1.75 to 0.25. The same as the US, right, from 1.75% to 0.25. And New Zealand's cut from 1% to 0.25%. All these are unprecedented lows. Well, the only exception is Hong Kong, which was the first time the Hong Kong Monetary Authority did not follow the US, that it only cut, right, less than 0.75%, only cut from 2 to 0.68. So let's take a look about the consequence. So after cutting the interest rate, you will find almost all of them turn back into positive inflation, right? Many of them are facing deflation. Say, for example, Hong Kong is negative 2.2%, Australia negative 0.3%. But then after the interest rate cut, all of them got higher inflation or less negative at least. Well, New Zealand, I would say, right, it keeps more or less the same at 1.4 or 1.5. So because of the cut in interest rate and increase in inflation rate, so the real interest rate becomes more severely negative, right? That's the negative interest rate. I will use RIR to stand for the real interest rate. So we have a real negative real interest rate regime and positive house price growth of this 6 economy. So it forms the hypothesis of real interest rate effect on house price change. So let's try to carry out a panel analysis on this cross-economies study. And I make use of this global house price index provided by the Federal Reserve Bank of Dallas, the US. And here shows you the preliminary result. The model 1 is based on year-on-year change. And the model 2 is based on quarter-on-quarter change with the autoregressive in 1 leg term. So both show a highly significant negative effect of the real interest rate on house price growth rate. So say, for example, the interpretation of the negative 2.5 coefficients can be understood as a 1% decrease in real interest rate will result in a 2.5% increase in house price. And in this panel analysis, we have introduced across economy fixed effects, and also we also control the GDP growth and unemployment rate change. And let's try to compare with New Zealand regression model. And the scatter plot also indicates very clearly that the real interest rate effect and the house price growth are in a negative relationship. And the regression model also reports a negative 4.2% relationship between the real interest rate and the growth rate of house price after controlling GDP and unemployment rate. And here shows the scatter plot of the 6 economies. And I would like to make some more empirical evidence to support this hypothesis, not just from this COVID crisis, but also from the previous 3 financial crises. That means it does not only apply to this case across 6 economies, but also it explained well for the previous 3 financial crises. The first one is 2009, the European sovereign debt crisis in Spain. And here shows you the same negative significant result between real interest rate and house price growth rate. And the second crisis was 2007, the US subprime crisis, and it also confirmed the negative relationship. And the chart shows you that the negative interest rate and turn into the positive zone and the bubble burst at the same time. And the last one was the 1998 Hong Kong plummet in house price due to the Asian financial crisis. And here's the paper that I submitted at that time. And here shows the empirical result also indicate a negative significant effect of the real interest rate on house price growth. I try to conclude by using Ryan Collins and Steve Keen's latest publication. So why can't you afford to buy a home is not because of too little land, but too much bank lending. Right? When money supply is too much, then no matter how many houses you're going to supply, it could not make housing price affordable. And Ryan Collins' statement is unlimited credit and money flows into a finite supply of property, which causes rising house price and which is coined as a housing finance feedback cycle. So let me conclude my presentation today. First of all, it is a global phenomenon. By means of this 6 economies analysis and the synchronized rebound of house price after the outbreak of COVID, so it provides a natural experiment to explain that house price rebound, at least in this case, is not caused by a local issue, but more likely to be a shock common to many of these economies during the pandemic. And there would be a very good experiment for us to say refute the hypothesis of capital gain tax policy or the housing supply issue or migrant, this kind of explanation. And then, interestingly, in this time, it worked like an experiment because it is an on-off experiment that when the outbreak of COVID, then all the OECD countries or economies, they cut the interest rate almost at the same time, and some countries even relax their loan-to-value ratio policies. And because of that, then this cross-country panel analysis will show about this synchronized effect on interest rate cuts. And the results clearly show us that real interest rates does not only affect the borrowing cost, but it becomes a market benchmark of rate of return. So investors will find it very attractive to borrow money and put into something that can hedge inflation in the coming future. So that is all my presentation. Thanks.